The dimly lit room was fairly quiet. The light from the bedside lamps gave the place a special atmosphere. The man extended his hand towards the girl, saying that she promised to help him. Her heart fluttered in her chest from the incredible beauty of the man opposite. Each time she moved closer and closer to the headboard behind her. But he asked Rosie to come closer so he could touch her. The girl realized that she couldn't disappear from this man's persistence, so she asked if they could just hold hands. The sight of such modesty brought a grin to his face. He sat down almost right next to her, amused by her words, asking if she was sure. Inside her, an internal scream was overcoming her. Of course, she wanted more than just holding hands. Having calmed down a little, she looked seriously in his direction again. She was overcome with confusion and confessed that a catastrophe would happen if she approached him. She looked into his eyes with fear, realizing that he was the main hero of this world. And the man, madly in love with her, did not understand what kind of girl was sitting in front of him. Rosie was the sister of the evil ruler of the magic tower. But how could she tell him such a terrible secret? The man didn't understand until the very end what she meant, so he simply admitted that he was happy not to be the only one who fell in love with her. He saw her confusion, so he continued openly about how she had no idea about his feelings. Rosie couldn't believe her ears. Did he really mean everything he said? She came to her senses immediately when he called her name. The fair-haired man in front of her sincerely admitted that he liked her very much. She immediately remembered all those nights spent together, and every word that he whispered obscenely in her ear in the deep silence. Up until this moment, she thought he was just having fun. The guy convinced her that he was not one of those men who allegedly confess their feelings just to spend one night together. With every word, he struck her more and more. Finally, having thought everything over, she came to her senses, asking him just one thing. She asked if, since he was talking like that, it wasn't just some kind of affair. It infuriated him that she could even think of such vile things about their relationship. Rosnia clearly did not expect such a reaction to her question, and immediately wanted to justify herself to him. She clutched the blanket in her hands for reassurance. In addition to this awkward question, she felt his menacing gaze on her. Rosie, unable to find the right words, remained where she was, trembling with fear. He just sighed tiredly when he realized that he had accidentally frightened the girl with his appearance. It was still dark outside, and the fireflies were the only rays of light in this pitch darkness. The man tried to keep a distance between them and again brought up the topic of their relationship. He extended his palm to hers, gently reminding her that once they started, there was no turning back. She listened attentively, not expecting him to suddenly pull her towards him. The girl stared at him silently with shock in her eyes, but it seemed that he didn't care at all about her looks, with every movement making the distance between them significantly smaller. It was clear from his face that he definitely liked what was happening now. His hair was soft as moonlight, and his eyes were as bright as the most beautiful emeralds. With what admiration he looked at her when he took her into his arms to calm her down. He pressed her as close to him as possible, whispering that now she would hug only him. Rosie listened to him silently, feeling how he played with her hair. In return, the man said that he would also hug only her. Having said all the conditions he wanted, he kissed the lobe of her ear, making her heart jump with happiness. The guy buried his palms in her soft curls, indicating that now she would also only kiss him. Rosnia asked him to wait, but under this insistence she continued to melt in his arms, and his words about how she touched him as much as she wanted threw her completely off track. He pulled away from her a little so he could see her face, but tried to maintain the level of closeness that had just been between them, looking at each other as if the whole world had stopped just so they could enjoy this moment forever. She placed her hand on his chest and shook her head in confusion in agreement. Convinced of her approval, a loving smile blossomed on his face. He reached out his hand to gently tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. Her heart stopped when she realized what he was about to do. Slowly approaching her, he kissed her on the lips as if it was their first time. As she surrendered to him, she wondered how it had come to this. Since Rosie was the hero of the novel, her brother was the most dangerous in this world, and her lover was his sworn enemy, between whom there was a terrible war. Fighting with each other, each of them wanted to emerge victorious in this duel. She was a forgotten and insignificant supporting character who was reborn after that battle. Now it would seem that such trifles are nothing in this case. But this story began long before today, namely 20 years ago. She didn't know everything from the very beginning and didn't remember how she was reborn in this novel. The girl remembered only the silhouette of a man with a sword in front of him, which led to her death. The girl was supposed to die at the hands of the protagonist because of her brother's crimes, and so ended her role in this novel. Each time after her death, the mechanism eventually began to turn. The hands stopped at the same place, forcing her to start her life from the very beginning. She remembered how suddenly she found herself back in her childhood. At that moment, the girl still did not understand anything, being in shock from what had happened, which seemed simply impossible. And while she was trying to digest everything, a pair of red eyes stared in her direction. Her brother sat at the head of the writing table watching his younger sister. He noticed Rosnia's panic and slammed the book shut, turning all his attention to her. The girl almost cried as she tried to comprehend the fact that she could die at any moment. She didn't even notice how the boy stood up from his place and came closer to her. The future villain stood before her, and now she will do everything to avoid repeating her past fate again. He stood with a book in his hands, wondering what had happened. The girl quickly hid her tense thoughts, as if nothing had happened, beginning to smile at her brother, not understanding what he expected to hear from a 3-year-old child. The boy did not understand these sudden changes in his sister's behavior, but decided to remain silent. He turned his gaze somewhere to the side and began to conjure with his hands. With the help of his strength, the boy picked up her favorite toy from the floor, which she had dropped a couple of minutes ago. She watched this with interest from the side when the toy was once again buried in her hands. As expected, he uses gravity distortion magic too easily for his age. But it was only natural to see this from the main villain, who was incredibly talented. After all, her villainous brother, who is only 4 years older than her, will one day become the youngest owner of the tower in history. While he will wreak havoc throughout the world, he will ultimately be defeated by the protagonist, a handsome man with an unusual appearance that can be remembered from just one glance in his direction. She remembered with horror their end and how mercilessly the Duke dealt with them. But now it's her turn to change their fate, even if it means she has to live her life over again. In confirmation of this, she confidently squeezed the toy in her hands. The girl thought she was born with a golden spoon in her mouth, but how did it happen that it was simply gilded? If everything goes according to the original plot this time, death will await her again. But how can she make sure that this does not happen? From the novels she had read in her past life, she came up with a plan that she would now have to teach the villain how to survive. But how can she teach this to such a crazy and brilliant brother? It seemed like an impossible goal to her, because her brother was so smart that he could read books about magic at such a young age, which are difficult even for scientists. They exchanged silent glances, each lost in their own thoughts and not knowing how to approach each other. The boy noticed her behavior and asked if she was looking at him for so long because she was hungry. But even his words didn't make her lose her temper, thinking only that the plan was so complicated that it was easier to give up. She squeezed the stuffed snake tighter. Swinging the toy, she cursed the whole world for the fact that something like this had happened to her. A second later, the snake flew into the boy's face, causing him to flinch in surprise. But he still remained in place, not stepping back even when the toy was already lying on the floor again. His gaze flashed dangerously red as he looked at his little sister. The girl thought that after her antics he would definitely want to kill her as she wanted, but she only hoped that it would be quick and painless. She closed her eyes and began to wait for the unimaginable, but she soon realized that nothing was happening and opened one eye to see why he was hesitating. Realizing that nothing had happened, she just started looking at him, wondering why her brother was silent. The boy thought she wanted to learn gravity-bending magic, but Rosie simply threw a toy at his face in a dramatic gesture. He squatted down, declaring that she was definitely his sister. It is not clear what came over him at that moment, but he hurried to pick her up. Taking her on his lap, he said that in the future she too would be a genius. He placed a huge book the size of her in front of her, thinking that it would be quite easy to teach her such magic. When I opened it, there were strange symbols and images drawn on each page. The girl turned her head towards her brother, looking at him with a sweet look. But then her face changed, thinking how crazy he was to think that giving such books to a 3-year-old child would be a good decision. Turning back, the girl began to read line by line, understanding what was written there. She didn't believe that she could read such a thing, thinking that she was a genius or that it was some kind of enhancement, but it seems that her brother also realized something. The boy heard her read the book with ease and realized that she really was a genius. She breathed a sigh of relief when she realized she had passed Adrian's first test. After that incident, when the boy realized that she was the same genius, he began to take Rosnia with him all the time to see the world. The girl was amazed by the beauty of this world, never thinking that she would have such an opportunity to admire it in person. This moment was forever etched in her memory as the happiest thing that had happened in all this time. Adrian even promised their father that he would take on Rosie's training for her magic training because it seemed she wanted it herself. The brother held her hand, assuring her that it would be better this way since his sister loved him. The girl couldn't remember ever telling him such a thing, and it was just her imagination. It seemed that their father became increasingly happier when he saw his children becoming closer and completely entrusted her to his eldest son. She screamed in her mind that this was not what she wanted, but no one could hear her thoughts to understand this. After his conversation with his father, Adrian picked up the baby in his arms. While the boy was leading her to the exit of the office, Rosie had already cursed him with all the words she knew. She thought that if she needed to tame it, she would gladly make it her footstool. It was clear outside and some girl was running along the garden. Since childhood, Rosnia began to live as Adriana's secret, the little sister hidden in the tower. One summer day when she turned 20, she came up with something. The sister complex was already getting a little annoying, so much so that she was starting to think that Rapunzel was the one who was being forced to sit in the tower. But this time the girl was not going to follow his rules and would not spend the whole summer locked up. The man was sitting in his office with important documents, distracted by someone's scream in the corridor. He looked up from the paperwork, turning his attention to the door to the room. Rosnia Hill stood in the passage from the first minutes, shouting that her brother was going to go south to identify the demonic beasts. But the most important thing was that now he would have to take her with him on the hike. The girl immediately fell silent when the doors she slammed simply fell off, shattering into pieces on the fields. The man didn't answer, as it wasn't the first time she broke down doors, but there was an excuse for everything, that she didn't notice how she became so strong when learning magic that she couldn't control it. Adrian asked why she wanted to go south with him, but the girl answered openly that she didn't want to hang around in the tower all year round and wanted to relax at the villa while he studied the animals. She tried to convince him by throwing out sharp facts so that he would definitely have no objections. And then after thinking a little, the man agreed to take her with him. The girl was happy and immediately began to sincerely thank him for this and say how much she loved him. The man did not expect that this would touch the girl so much that she would even say such sweet words to him. He tried not to show that he was embarrassed, trying to maintain the authority of a formidable older brother, setting the condition that on the journey he would not go further than Willie, where they would live, to which the girl immediately agreed. But Rosnia had no idea who she would meet in that place. The south was simply unimaginably beautiful. The girl immediately went to the sea, admiring the view that opened up to her. There was already a sand castle built by some children on the shore. But Rosie didn't pay any attention to this and was already heading barefoot towards the water. There she already found a shell lying alone. The girl looked at her find from both sides, thinking how beautiful it really was. It was already getting dark outside and Rosnia felt that she was quite hungry. She headed towards the gazebo where a man was lying on a deck chair. Hearing his sister's voice, he immediately looked up from his reading. The girl tucked her hair behind her ear, and her dress was blown by the wind, adding more charm to her sweet appearance. He put the book on the table, wondering where she kept leaving her shoes. The girl, unknowingly, helped with her hands above her head, watching as Adrian headed towards her, amazed at her inattention. Suddenly, the girl shouted something incomprehensible from shock. She didn't expect that her brother would immediately pick her up in his arms as soon as they approached. He carried her towards the mansion, telling her to be patient as he had already prepared the barbecue for dinner. The girl put her arms around his neck to keep from falling and said that she couldn't stand it and wanted to eat right now. The brother could not refuse her, so he did as she wished. But the girl noted that if it were the real Adrian, he would have thrown her off himself long ago, and it seems that this can be considered a successful rehabilitation. Tomorrow morning, her brother will leave on a ship to carry out the Emperor's order to capture the beast, which means that she will be left alone in their villa. But the girl even benefited from this outcome, because she would finally be able to take a break from his care. They were already approaching the gates of the house to spend the rest of the day there. At night, she tossed and turned with thoughts that her brother had threatened to ban her for 10 years if problems arose in his absence. The next morning, Rosie wished her brother to come back as soon as possible. She accompanied him to the entrance of the mansion, telling him to be careful when he carried out the emperor's order. The man only responded to her concern with a kind grin. It sounded funny because of the two of them. It was Rosnia who had to be more careful. The one and only ruler of the magic tower that rises in the center of the world, and the patron of animals and creatures that succumbed to his gestures and fell at his feet, was told to be careful. The girl herself began to think about the meaning of her previous words when he called her to him. And now this horrible villain, as if nothing had happened, was tugging at the top of his beloved sister's head. It seemed nice, but the girl didn't like that they considered her a dog when giving these unnecessary instructions. She smiled at him, promising that she would stay in the villa as he wanted, but in her soul she was already cursing this stupid sister complex. The man was still filled with the feeling that something might happen in his absence, but he still headed to the carriage, saying goodbye to his sister. When the carriage drove away from the villa, Rosie was already in seventh heaven, anticipating this feeling of freedom. She danced her way into the house. How suddenly the girl saw the dog. The pet came closer to her, watching her every movement. It was a huge black dog with red eyes like Adrian's. She needed to figure out how to get rid of her brother, whose brother he had sent to follow her. Having scratched his muzzle, the dog immediately began to reciprocate, demanding more affection. Seeing how he was reaching out to her, the girl came up with the idea of bribing him to get rid of him. Summoned creatures love high concentrations of mana, as if it were cotton candy, something only the master can provide. Luckily for her, mana balls are very easy to make, and the dog immediately pricked up his ears when he saw the treat. He immediately lit up with happiness, realizing that the girl was giving it to him. He immediately began to whistle as the girl pulled the ball closer and closer, but it was too easy to just give it away. The beast heard this and immediately became upset, thinking that he would not receive what he had been waiting and begging for a very long time. The girl was even stupidly surprised at how pitiful he looked now. She scratched him behind the ear and said that she would give him Manu only on one condition. From that moment on, wherever Rosie went or did, the dog would not have to comply with Adrian without her consent. But then, if he made concessions, she promised that she would create these mana balls for him all summer. The dog immediately barked as if agreeing to her proposal. The girl threw him a ball to give him a boost and invited him to go to the market with her. At the market, Rosnia noticed that they were selling fruit kebabs, and she asked if her pet wanted such a delicacy. Hearing the joyful barking, they went shopping. Rosie couldn't notice that the clouds were gathering in the sky, warning of rain. She could not catch a cold under any circumstances because she had worked so long to achieve this freedom. How lucky she was that she thought of this outcome and took an umbrella just in case when she went shopping. They walked along the streets, humming songs to themselves. Suddenly, the girl saw beautiful jewelry and immediately ran to buy something from the assortment. The girl was glad that she finally managed to communicate with normal people and not with the psychos from the tower. While they were walking along the streets, it was already pouring rain outside. The first drops fell to the ground and Rosie decided that it was time to go back. With each passing minute, the rain became heavier and heavier. The girl realized that it was time to speed up, and so she ran home as fast as she could so as not to get soaked through. After a while, she was already running up to the gates of her family villa. Suddenly stopping, she noticed something interesting out of the corner of her eye. The girl turned her head in that direction. She came closer and noticed someone's hand sticking out of the bushes. Right in the middle of the sidewalk in front of her lay an unconscious man. The girl was surprised, thinking what she should do with this man now. He was already soaking wet, and the girl began to think who was lying in front of her. The dog immediately felt threatened, and the girl immediately thought that it was some kind of criminal on the run. So why did this mysterious man fall on the private property of the Hill family? He had blonde hair and looked quite tall, perhaps around 185 centimeters. Rosie wondered whether it was worth saving him at all or leaving him lying there until he woke up on his own. The girl pushed him with her foot to see the face of the mysterious stranger. Shock immediately appeared on her face when she saw his true identity. His appearance was unusually handsome, and the eyelashes were as light as the newly fallen snow. In front of her lay the same man who seemed terribly familiar to her, but she could not remember why she thought so. The girl couldn't believe her eyes, wondering if this was really happening to her now. She quickly came out of her thoughts, finally noticing how the dog had been standing next to her this whole time and growling. He seemed to be enraged, ready to attack a person at any moment, sensing the potential danger to his owners. It seemed that this creature was somehow connected to Adrian, as if now next to her was not just a dog, but her brother himself. And yet the girl could not remember where she had seen him, that he seemed so familiar to her. It suddenly dawned on her, remembering where she first met him. It happened in the banquet hall of the Imperial Court 4 years ago. Among that whole crowd, he was the only one who stood out with his unusual appearance. She looked at him from the balcony, not daring to approach him for a conversation. Rosie saw him only once, but even from afar it shone so brightly that it could blind. And only after remembering this incident did the girl realize that the main character was in front of her. The sworn enemy of her family who dared to kill her and her brother in a past life. A widely known fantasy novel was called The Duke's Only Partner, in which it was written about a beautiful commoner with sacred powers. There she met the only Duke of the Empire, named Ruvelin Rashian. According to the plot, their relationship was in the style of a contractual relationship, and then they fell in love with each other. He had such an irresistible charm that even the most hackneyed cliches seemed so fresh. A direct example from this novel was the incident where he suddenly grabbed her hand. He begged Sierra to just look at him once and then he would do anything for her. But that was only the beginning. The next moment was when they were in the room and he asked his beloved not to leave him. The man pressed her to the bed beneath him, declaring that she was his whole world and he could not live a day without her. After all, without her he was nobody. The one and only admirer of the main character, so sweet that every girl reading this novel had butterflies in her stomach. He was also the most jealous yandere, which was his only downside. But despite all this, he also continued to hope that she was looking forward to their first wedding night together with the same trepidation. You couldn't tell from him that he was a virgin, who had never even hugged a girl. But the techniques he used made the heroine cry with pleasure. Reading this novel, any girl would want to be in the place of this main character just to be with him. And Rosnia was no exception. Remembering how in her past life she flowed through Ruvelin, probably she hit her head on the bed, which is why she ended up in this world. Finally coming to her senses, she realized that now it was not as important as helping this man now. She knew it was a bad decision to let her brother's sworn enemy into their home, but he was too hot to just leave him to die on the streets. Using magic, she lifted him into the air, and when she ran inside the house, she threatened the dog that if he continued to bark, he would not receive another ball of mana as a treat. Having placed him next to the fireplace, she somehow removed his completely soaked shirt. But there was another problem. What should she do with his wet pants? With every glance at him, the girl could not stop thinking all this time about how beautiful his body was. But this was not surprising since the main character was lying in front of her. Even unconscious, he was simply amazing. If Rosie had seen him more often, she would have definitely fallen in love with him because he was her type. But the question still remained open. What should she do with his trousers? At first she wanted to leave everything as it was, but then she remembered that because of this, he might catch a cold. Thank God, she remembered in time, that she could change his clothes with the help of magic, and she wouldn't even have to look at him again. Once all this was over, she turned towards him again. The girl gasped when she saw the result of her work. Because of all those muscles, the shirt hugged the man's chest tightly. Moreover, it was very short, which could not help but emphasize his graceful legs. Looking at this, it seemed as if he was wearing a mini dress and not a men's shirt. Now, all that remained was to move it to the bedroom on the first floor. After they were in the room, she laid him on the bed and began to give him medicine for the fever, making sure that the guy drank every last drop. The girl was even surprised that the man's temperature rose so suddenly. He mumbled, trying to utter at least one word, but still did not resist taking the medicine. The girl couldn't help but think about nothing but how strong the Duke's charm was. Completely immersed in her thoughts, she didn't even notice how she accidentally spilled the liquid. The man silently watched the girl with his eyes half open. Suddenly, he raised his hand, which made Rosie surprised. She didn't expect him to suddenly grab her wrist and pull her towards himself. The only thing the girl managed to do at that moment was scream in surprise. A second later, he had already pushed her onto himself. He buried his fingers in his wavy hair and pulled her as close to him as he felt like. His eyes opened slightly, slowly regaining consciousness. Seeing the girl in front of him, the man thanked Rosnia for saving his life. But what else could she have done? She explained to him that there was such a thunderstorm raging outside that he would have simply died. The girl looked clearly into his eyes, watching his reaction. Rosie couldn't get over the fact that he could remain so handsome even when he was sick. Ruvalen said he would like to know the name of his benefactor who saved his life. The girl was taken aback by his question, not knowing how to react. Should she have told him that she was Rosnia Hill, who also happened to be his enemy's sister? Moving slightly away from his face, she continued to think that there was nothing wrong with telling him who she was. Maybe this will make him hate her family less. Now he is softer towards her, and if he plays his cards right, then perhaps she will still be able to avoid death. When the calculations were completed, she gathered her strength and began to act. She looked the guy in the eyes and told everything as it was without a drop of lies. But the most unexpected thing was that the guy admitted that he was right after all. Abruptly and unexpectedly, he moved upward, knocking her back. The guy sat her on his lap, maintaining eye contact, not believing that it was really her. The girl was surprised that the Duke knew her, but how could one not know Rosnia Hill? She was, after all, the only younger sister of Adrian Hill, the only princess of the Magic Tower. It seemed that her heart was beating so hard that one might think that it would simply stop at the sight of the man's beauty. The man came even closer to her, so close that the tips of their noses touched and whispered about whether she knew the man sitting right in front of her. She was surprised that this was the first man who called her by name when they first met, since usually all people address her formally. He acted as if he was an old friend of Rosie's, with whom she spent all her time. The girl couldn't even look at him because she was completely embarrassed by such closeness. But it seemed the man was only amused by her reaction, and he only pressed her closer to him. The girl clearly didn't expect this, but she didn't resist at all, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. She was very nervous, not knowing what to answer him to the question he asked. Finally getting over herself, Rosie looked into his eyes, acknowledging out loud all his greatness and popularity. Hearing her words, the man only smiled softly at her. The girl was amazed by this, thinking that his soft side added charm to his already handsome appearance. He really was the kind of person that you would see at least once, but would never be able to forget. A silence fell between them, but no one was eager to break it first. Rosie didn't know how to react to Ruvalen, thinking that he was trying to seduce her with his delightful smile. After thinking for a bit, she decided that it was time to start acting, but first she needed to get out of his clutches. When he saw that the girl wanted to move away, the smile immediately disappeared from the guy's face. If she thought she could just leave, she was deeply mistaken because he wouldn't let her go anywhere that easily. He wrapped his arms around her waist and buried his nose in her hair. Rosie didn't know what to do in this situation, so she immediately asked him what was going on. The girl was scared, thinking that he felt ill again because of the fever, but everything was not so simple. The guy kept whispering her nickname as if she could disappear at any moment, but how could he act so casually with her if they had only met once? And all this deathly silence in the house made the situation more and more difficult for the girl to understand. He was acting very strangely, and Rosie couldn't calm him down, but he didn't seem to hear her. His fingers trembled as he opened up to the girl, talking about the pain that didn't even allow him to breathe normally. After these words, Rosnia thought that he was definitely out of his mind because he was suffering so much, and his behavior confirmed it. She touched his forehead to check his temperature and was horrified to realize that he was burning all over. The man admitted that he had a constant fever and his body ached to the point that it felt like he was dying. The girl immediately realized what was happening, and it was clearly not what she wanted at the moment. She asked Ruvalen if he felt like his body was being pierced, to which he nodded his head affirmatively. After this, there was no doubt that the man was overcome by the madness of magical powers. The reason why the Duke had only one partner in the novel was very simple, and all because only the main character could calm the raging magical power of the main character. So why then did Ruvalen decide to go crazy in front of Rosie and not in front of Sierra, and in his brother's room at that? The girl was seriously scared, not knowing what to do in such a situation. But if the original story is anything to go by, then physical contact is the only way to suppress that madness in him. Contact can be different, starting with light hugs, ending with a passionate kiss on the lips. But still, why was he now with Rosnia and not with his beloved, begging her not to leave? Everything was very bad, because the last stage of this madness had begun, and the girl understood this very well. With each movement, he moved closer and closer to her face. It was dangerous to be alone with him, because with every minute he was starting to lose his mind more and more. Rosie knew she was in a very bad position now, knowing she couldn't resist a man who was much stronger. Placing his palm on her cheek, he asked her for a favor. Because of the very short distance, Rosie could feel his breath on her lips. Without further ado, Reuvelin asked the girl to kiss him. As a person who read the original, the girl knew about one nuance. If she left Reuvelin in this state, because of this enormous power raging within him, he would simply die. She continued to look at him in a stupor, still digesting his previous request. Rosie knew she had no choice, because she would never allow such a wonderful man to die. But how can she help him if suppressing emotions is the task of the main character, and not some sister of the owner of a powerful tower, and therefore under no circumstances should she get involved with him? And the man continued to persuade her to kiss him, as if he knew that the girl would not be able to resist his beauty. She had to be extremely careful with him, otherwise she would get into big trouble. She saw how bad he felt, but making a hasty decision was still wrong. But his pleas for help still spurred her to commit this indecent act. Seeing how bad the guy was, the girl for a moment could not shake the feeling that now she was faced with a choice on which the fate of humanity depended, and not just helping a person. Well, that's why all this is happening with Rosnia, because Reuvelin was supposed to have eternal love at first sight with the main character. Having finally made a difficult decision, the girl suddenly lifted the guy's face so that she could look straight into his eyes. And sending everything to hell, she responded with consent to his request for a kiss. The man couldn't believe his ears, thinking that he would never get an answer. Rosie made it a condition that it would be just a simple kiss and nothing more. To which the man agreed without hesitation, seeing no point in being indignant about this. Judging by his answer, she had the feeling that they were talking about completely different things. But now it didn't matter because their lips were already just centimeters apart. She closed her eyes and already anticipated what was about to happen. But then another problem arose when she remembered that she didn't know how to kiss. Realizing this, the man took full control. With his free hand, he lifted her head with his fingers, opening her mouth slightly, which immediately surprised the girl. Every second he got closer seemed so slow, as if time had simply stopped. And then their lips touched in a sensual kiss. Suddenly the man knocked her back. The girl even screamed when she landed with her head on the mattress, not expecting him to do something like that at such a moment. Now he had her firmly in his grip, hanging over her and eliminating any possible attempt at resistance. The girl asked if they really should go that far, although she knew Reuvelin's answer in advance. Before she had time to come to her senses, he was again biting into her lips, but more insistently than before. It seemed like the kiss lasted forever, so they didn't even notice how it had already gotten dark outside. The girl felt how his magical power enveloped her from head to toe, feeling the full force of his madness. When the oxygen in her lungs began to run out, she only then thought about why they were still kissing if the magic had long since died down. Therefore, at that very moment, she pulled away from his lips, breaking the kiss. Trying to catch her breath, she called his name. Hearing the voice, he immediately switched his attention from her lips to her eyes, and only she wanted to say that they should stop this. When suddenly he pressed his lips to hers again for another kiss. The girl immediately thought that the Duke's innocence would be at risk if he continued to be under threat. But most importantly, she was worried about the question of the beautiful heroine. Finally, after several attempts, she managed to get him off her. She looked at him with a genuine smile on her face, but her expression changed to a more serious one. The man looked at her as if he had been in pain. His face was like that of a poor puppy who had been abandoned by his owner. The girl saw this and could not find the strength in herself to refuse, but she had to stop him. But the Duke seemed not to hear her, demanding more and more. You wouldn't know it at first glance, but he really turned out to be a man who could drive people crazy in different ways. The girl admitted that such a relationship was wrong. The guy immediately asked why she thought so. Looking into his eyes, she said everything as it is without a drop of lies, that their relationship is too impulsive. He was pushing too hard, and that wasn't what she wanted. The man wondered whether she really thought so or whether it was a lie. And the smile never left his face when he heard such things addressed to him. The girl was surprised by this, as she expected a completely different reaction. The man stroked her hair and agreed to stop only after the kiss. Well, how could she ignore him for long if she looks at him with such an angelic gaze? In order not to go too far, she decided that it was time to leave him alone to sleep. Quickly getting out of bed, she hurried to the exit of the room. When she left, she couldn't help but feel the gaze on her back, but how could he even make such an innocent expression on her face after that kiss? With the help of magic, the girl covered him with a blanket, reminding him that he should have a good rest and sleep after he got soaked through in the rain. The man lay rooted to the spot, not knowing how to react to the concern for his health. Rosie wished him sweet dreams and left the chambers. Even when the door closed, he continued to look at the girl, watching as she walked away, leaving him alone. And only after that, he finally closed his eyes, gradually falling asleep. And so went Rosnia Hill's first day free from her overprotective brother. Meanwhile, no one was sleeping in the hunter's camp. The man wiped his sword, asking if they had received a response from the Duke. He reminded his partner that the Duke would only return in a month, so he would have to be patient. The captain of the knights, Verki, continued to go about his business. The fair-haired partner helped him with the cleaning, saying that it was boring with the other guys, so he was really looking forward to his lordship returning. The others broke their bones when they fought him in a duel, so the captain asked him to spare the others. But the boy liked that only his lordship could break his bones. He hoped that the Duke would return with a truce from the boys from the tower, and the war would end. The captain listened to the knight and sent him to train so that he would not stand there uselessly. The man listened to him and went to carry out the order with a smile. That same evening, lights were on in all the windows of Villa Hill. Rosie threw a box of clothes that Ruveline might like onto the chair. Having fed her faithful pet with manna, the girl went for a walk around the mansion. She walked along the corridors wondering if her guest had already fallen asleep. She couldn't get rid of those memories of that evening with him in her brother's chambers, and today's kiss was accidental, and she didn't know if she should wait for the next time. She had already suffered enough because of men in her past life, so she didn't want her heart to be broken again. She walked back and forth, completely not understanding what to do with herself from these annoying thoughts. After a while, she decided that taking a bath would help her relieve stress. But to do this, first I had to change clothes. Having finally done this, the girl wrapped herself in a towel as she walked towards the bathroom. As if nothing had happened, she walked into the bathroom. Suddenly, Rosie became dumbfounded. In front of her stood Ruveline, whom she had literally put to bed a few hours ago. Seeing the named guests, the guy immediately started saying something. He was very tall, so she had to tilt her head back to look at his face. The man stood in front of her wearing only a robe. If she had lowered her head down, she would not have seen anything except the cape. Drops of water were dripping from his body onto the floor, so the girl quickly realized that the guy had been taking a bath until she interrupted him. The girl immediately blushed, not thinking that she had met someone in this place, because she herself had personally seen him fall asleep in his chambers. The man immediately moved closer to the girl. She stood rooted to the spot, not knowing how to hint to him that he should at least cover himself in front of her, because his entire body was very clearly visible. Rosie backed away, wanting to get out of the room as quickly as possible, when she accidentally slipped on the wet floor. The man immediately rushed towards her, hoping to catch her before she hit the floor. But it wasn't that difficult, so a second later the girl was already in Ruveline's arms. She was completely taken aback, and so she grabbed his shoulders in fear, afraid of falling. Only then did the guy explain that he couldn't sleep and so decided to take a bath, but somehow forgot to warn about it. When the girl realized that she was safe, she immediately moved away from the man. She said there was nothing wrong with that, but she wanted him to get dressed as Rosie was going to take a bath herself. The Duke listened to the girl's request and replied that he would do everything as she asked. As he walked past her towards the exit, the girl couldn't take her eyes off the floor. The girl immediately perked up when she heard that if she needed help, she should call him, to which she immediately refused. She clearly didn't want to know what kind of help he could give her in taking a bath. As soon as the door slammed shut, the girl was finally left alone. Rosie the girl did not understand whether he was really the main character or just some kind of beast undercover. After taking a bath, the girl hurried back to her chambers to sleep. Walking down the corridors, her hair fell loose behind her. Only now the Duke began to follow her wherever she went. She looked back at him with a silent question about this, but the guy didn't say anything, just kept smiling as if nothing was happening, so Rosie thought that the main character had definitely gone crazy. The Hill and Rashian families have been enemies for generations, and now that she was the daughter of the Hill family and helped the Duke survive and accidentally calmed his madness, it was Rosnia herself who made him obsessed with her. Nothing good came out of it, not knowing what to do with the Duke now. The man continued to follow her, thanking her for the fact that he was already feeling much better because of her help. The girl immediately turned to him happily, since such news could not but please her. With every step, the guy got closer and closer to the girl. Suddenly, Rosie screamed loudly. Reuvelin grabbed her hand and pulled her sharply towards him. She was afraid to open her eyes, not knowing what this madman could do this time. But then as she heard if everything was okay with her, she opened her eyes. The guy held her close to him by the waist, holding the top of her head with his other hand so that she could see his face. The girl asked herself in her head whether he really asked about her well-being or if it just seemed that way to her. But no, she was not okay, and it was all because of him. Wrapping her arms around his neck, she whispered his name. And while he is trying to understand what she wants to do with him, the girl has already come dangerously close to him. 1 second, and their lips were already captured in a kiss, and all because of him. Rosie didn't even realize how much time had passed. Only after some time did they break the kiss, calling each other by name. But it was only a respite before the second approach that he arranged for her. He didn't want to let her go, continuing to hold on to her all the time. With each passing minute, Rosie began to think that she was clearly going crazy, since she should not have allowed herself to engage in such indecency with Reuvelin. So after these thoughts, she finally broke the kiss. Seeing how upset the girl was about something, the man quickly kissed her one last time. The girl's face immediately changed, realizing that just a little more and she wouldn't be able to stop. And the guy himself couldn't take his eyes off her lips. But at that very second, a familiar smile appeared on his face when he called out to the girl. Her legs were shaking with embarrassment and fear, not knowing what to expect from him this time. The guy touched her cheek with his fingers, gently removing the protruding strand of hair from her face. He hugged her, still not believing that she was the first to kiss him. The girl allowed him to hug her without any indignation. But then she suddenly came to her senses, realizing what this meant. Rosie tried to get out of his grip, but nothing worked. She couldn't even move from the spot, realizing that she herself had allowed herself to be trapped. Feeling the girl dig her nails into his shoulder, the guy raised his head to look at her. The girl apologized to him for being too impulsive. Trying again to get out of his grip, she promised that this would not happen again. The guy looked at her seriously, and only he wanted to say something important to her words. He couldn't help but smile as he repeated her words about impulsiveness. It was pretty funny, so the guy started to burst out laughing. The girl watched this silently, not understanding what made him laugh so much. Once he calmed down, he continued the dialogue, saying that this was quite an interesting statement. There was an awkward pause between them, and the girl didn't know how to react to him. In any case, it was time for them to go to bed, so he asked Rosie if he should take her to her room. The girl refused because it was not necessary at all. The man listened to her but did not insist on his own. Again breaking the distance between them, the guy came closer to her. He reached out and buried his fingers in her soft curls, and leaving a farewell kiss on her locks, behaving like a true gentleman. Rosie blushed, feeling for the first time that a man had shown himself to her like that. After that, they went to their rooms wishing each other good night's sleep. The next morning, the girl realized that she had overslept even though she needed to get up early. She put on her shoes as she left her room. While the girl rushed to check on Reuvelin, she prayed that he would not have time to do anything. Thank God the entrance to his chambers was guarded by their family dog, which did not allow him to do anything wrong. She immediately greeted her pet, realizing that she could breathe a sigh of relief since nothing had happened while she was sleeping. The girl opened the door to his chambers to check what he was currently doing. Having completely dismissed the painting in the room, the girl was surprised. Duke Rashian lay in his bed, sleeping peacefully. She came closer to his bed, telling him to wake up because it was already morning outside. The girl repeated it several more times until she decided to simply turn it over her shoulder. But only she managed to see that he woke up and somehow react. He quickly pulled her hand towards him. Laying her on top, he embraced her, burying his face in her hair. She remained lying there, not even knowing what to say to such abrupt changes. But the guy quickly turned over, laying her down next to him and falling back into sleep. What kind of person was he if he even kissed her on the cheek in his sleep? The girl reacted quickly and hit him in the back so that he would finally wake up. But even so, he did not immediately understand what was happening and began to wake up only after some time. Opening his eyes abruptly, he immediately released the girl from his embrace. Finally free from his grip, she was able to finally catch her breath. The guy even blushed, not expecting such behavior from himself. He apologized to her for this because he thought it was a dream. making such a cute face on top of that, so that she would have no reason to be angry with him. Even his handsome face was beautiful, but what if she didn't care about his appearance? How would he have acted differently? She got out of his bed, telling him to get ready while she waited in the living room. He continued to smile, realizing that he had won the situation. But that wasn't as important as her plans for today. After breakfast, the girl suggested that they go see the sea together. The view of the sea was simply amazing as always, but it seemed that Ruvelin was watching the girl more than the scenery. She noticed his gaze and asked if he was enjoying their walk. The man didn't even hide the fact that she attracted him more than the memorization of her appearance. It was just crazy. The girl thought that she would pinch him right there for such a charming smile when he started flirting. They walked along the riverbank, enjoying each other's company. She still couldn't let go of their recent conversation, thinking that after all, he was just that kind of person. Rosie noticed that he was looking somewhere and asked what he noticed there. He replied that the guys in the distance were looking at her all the time. The girl didn't understand which guys he was talking about, so I decided to look in the direction where the man's gaze was directed. Along the shore stood a group of men talking to each other. One man started whispering something to another when he noticed that the girl was looking straight at them. The reaction of his interlocutor was very suspicious, observing that he even jumped on the spot from her words. Rosie and Ravelin walked past them as if nothing had happened, while the girl thought that this was happening because the guys were admiring her beauty. If it weren't for the Duke here but her brother, he would have already gone crazy, threatening to gouge out their eyes. These thoughts immediately sent a chill down my spine, but that wasn't the whole problem. Only now did the girl notice Ruvelin's reaction to those men, and it clearly did not bode well. People noticed this too and were seriously scared. A second later, Hill watched as they ran away as quickly as possible, disappearing from sight. Without even really understanding what had happened, the girl continued her walk, enjoying the presence of the man next to her. She said that from now on she would only look at him. The man smiled, hearing her confession, and asked why she liked his face so much. Rosie laughed, clearly not expecting to hear a question about such obvious things. Since their topic has reached such a point, he must first answer what he thinks about her. She herself knew that she was quite cute, but what did such a picky person think about her? With each passing minute, waiting for an answer, she began to think that maybe the problem was that the girl was not his type, and that was why he was thinking for so long. But suddenly he stopped abruptly. The guy turned to her, forcing her to pay attention to him. His hands gently grabbed her in a strong grip as if the whole world had frozen just for them. He admitted that Rosie always looked stunning to him. It seemed to him that it would be better if he put it out there to get wet in the rain. She looked at him questioningly, expecting him to explain the meaning of the words to her. The guy continued, saying that even then she would still have helped him. He knew this, and in a possessive gesture he pressed her to himself, giving her time to think it over. After a walk in the late afternoon, they returned back to the villa. Ruvelin told the girl that he would cook them dinner so that she could relax and take a bath first. She was even embarrassed by this courtesy, because she didn't even know that the Duke knew how to work, but the guy insisted that he wanted to demonstrate his culinary skills in front of Rosie. Was it mentioned in the original that the main character had such skills, but I still didn't argue. She couldn't shake the thought that the Duke was behaving very suspiciously. After a while, they were already sitting at the table, starting their meal. After the soup, she tried the juice that was poured for her. The girl was amazed at how delicious the dishes Ruvelin prepared. The guy watched how quickly she gobbled up the dinner he had ordered for her, and the smile never left his lips as he was pleased with himself. Unexpectedly, while the girl was drinking the drink, the Duke kissed her on the cheek. He continued kissing her, but it was clearly not what Rosie was expecting. She tried to stop him, thinking that the guy was losing control again due to the mana surge. She finally managed to push him away from her, staring at him in confusion. He seemed to look like normal, and she breathed a sigh of relief. The Duke did not resist her and only extended his hand towards her. With a slight movement of his finger, he brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Rosie was immediately surprised by his sudden change in mood, so she wondered if she should draw the line before her heart jumped out of her chest. She asked when he planned to return to the Rashian estate. The guy was embarrassed by such a question, not thinking that their conversation would turn to this, but he still asked if she wanted it. The estate couldn't remain empty without the Duke for such a long time, but it seemed that this didn't bother him at all, and he had no plans to return there anytime soon. He admitted that he would not return to the estate until he became truly dear to the girl. Why was he so eager to win her heart, as if it meant anything to him? Everything became clear to her, because his behavior served some purpose. This conversation had gone down the wrong path, and the guy immediately realized it, bringing Rosie out of her thoughts. The girl began to feel unwell and immediately told him about it. She hurried from the table, thanking him for the food he had prepared. As soon as Reuvelin was left alone, he took off his friendly mask, not hiding his true nature. Already in the room, the girl was lying in bed, dreaming that this night would pass peacefully. Rosie heard a whine and remembered the presence of her pet. She immediately fed him a ball of manna, watching with what desire the dog ate the treat. Suddenly, the girl was horrified to notice someone's presence. The manosphere transmitted a message to her. It was Adrian who sent word to his sister to return in 10 days, since the reprimand had taken less time than he thought. The girl was in shock, not expecting everything to work out as expected. She couldn't even imagine that Adrian would return so soon. She was simply doomed. Rosie didn't want to be locked up for 10 years if Adrian found out what had happened in his absence. And Reuvelin made the situation worse by adding fuel to the fire. Should she have secretly contacted the Rashian family, since they would hardly have guessed that the Duke was with the daughter of an enemy family? Too much had suddenly fallen on her shoulders, but first she needed to answer Adrian. A ball of manna appeared in the air, through which she was going to send the letter. She sent him a message that she was very glad that he would be returning earlier than expected, and was looking forward to meeting him. Filled with false joy, she hoped that her brother would like the line that said that he shouldn't worry about her, but for now she needed to stay in shape until he arrived. Having given the dog a ball with a letter, she continued getting ready for bed. For now, she is forced to continue to suspect Reuvelin and keep a close eye on him due to his suspicious behavior. She seriously had no time for romance, and she understood this perfectly well. The owl sat on a tree and hooted. In the middle of the night, when everyone was asleep, only this bird showed signs of life. Rosnia slept soundly and nothing interfered with it. Opening her eyes, she tried to begin to come to her senses. She didn't even remember how she fell asleep, but why the bed seemed so hard to her. The girl turned over onto her stomach, studying what was happening around her. The dream was wiped away when she saw that she was lying on Reuvelin's stomach. He looked at her, remembering the misunderstanding that happened between them at dinner. This was not her room, which meant they were still in Adrian's chambers. The guy kept talking about how hard his heart had been beating since he saw Rosie. He lifted her face by the chin to see her reaction. Now he would never let her go, unless she had let him die back then. He quickly moved closer to her face, leaving no space between them. To Rosie's surprise, he locked their lips in a very sensual kiss. He fell back onto the pillows, not letting go of her, while she tried to mumble something into his kiss. Anyone could see with their eyes closed how much he desired her, but she needed to know the real reason. Breaking the kiss, she whispered his name. He immediately smiled, waiting for the question she wanted to ask. But he immediately fell into a stupor when Rosie asked about his experience. There was a very awkward pause between them. The man asked what exactly she meant by experience, but it was clear that Rosie was referring to his intimate relationships with other women. He grabbed her wrists with both hands in a strong grip. It was clear that he didn't particularly like her question. The girl didn't understand why he was angry over such a trifle, but Reuvelin immediately became embarrassed, not understanding who she took him for. He was an extremely popular duke, so she asked about such things. The guy sighed sadly, showing with his whole appearance that he was hurt by her words, but he still admitted that she was the only girl. After all, he had never had such closeness with anyone before, and also in his world there is only Rosie and no one else. It was a very sincere confession, and you could see it in his eyes. The girl felt the atmosphere in the room change and immediately began to apologize for such a stupid question. He looked at her with the same loving eyes, watching her apologies, but immediately stopped her, seeing her remorse because it was expected, since their relationship was still extremely unclear. She immediately stopped, silently looking in his direction. She made another cryptic remark to herself about his lack of confidence. So she asked the most important question that she had kept to herself for a long time, about why he was unconscious on her family's private property. The smile immediately disappeared from his face upon hearing this. But Rosie didn't care, as getting an answer was much more important. He thought for a moment, searching for a suitable answer, but he just as quickly asked if it was really that important for her to know about this. This was very suspicious, which made her even more determined to get an answer out of him. The guy was very persistent and didn't want to tell her anything about that incident. She asked him not to run away from the answer, and then he said that he didn't remember anything. The girl was embarrassed by what he just said. He really didn't remember anything until he came to his senses and found out that Rosie had saved him. It was for this reason that he did not want to return to the duchy until his memories returned. He pulled the girl closer to him. Looking into her eyes, he admitted that communicating with her was good for him. That's why he wanted her to let him be there. Touch when he wants, kiss and be inside. He held her as close as possible, deliberately whispering all these obscenities in her ear. It was still night outside. The moonlight penetrating through the windows illuminated the chambers. Rosie's long hair was scattered all over the pillow. Sitting on the bed, Reuvelin watched her without taking his eyes off her. He couldn't sleep because of the thoughts that wouldn't leave his head. The girl fell fast asleep and looked so cute that the guy couldn't resist stroking her on the top of her head. But even from this, Rosie woke up, afraid that something had happened. He squeezed her hand, telling her not to worry and to continue sleeping. Seeing her so confused, he couldn't help but smile. The girl realized this and fell back asleep, saying that she was very hungry. The Duke heard her strange muttering in her sleep and did not understand why she wanted to eat right now. But even this made her even sweeter, and he couldn't help but notice it. Suddenly, while he was thinking about her, the girl began to mumble again. She whispered her brother's name. Reuvelin heard this and was instantly overcome with anger. Adrian was her brother, and he knew perfectly well what this man was like. The closest person to Rosnia than the Duke, and if he had the opportunity, he would erase Adrian Hill's memory of her. He looked at her and dreamed that this girl would be only his, from the very beginning to the very end. Her heart, her soul, and every moment with her were only his. He didn't even understand when this desire had time to appear. Suddenly, memories from the past came flooding back. It happened long before that banquet 4 years ago, in early summer, when the lilacs were blooming beautifully in the Russian duchy. He was 13 years old that day, and he was trying to run away. That very day when he tried to escape from his own destiny. He sat at the table and listened to the butler tell him that he had received a gift from Count Andrico. He listened silently, reluctantly spending the day. Even on this birthday, everyone will pity and look at the young boy because his parents died on this very day, but despite this, he still sent a reply letter to the Count. He didn't understand what kind of affection they expected from him for parents he had never even seen, but that was what made him even more angry. Everyone just thought he was a good, quiet boy, which was complete nonsense. He closed his eyes, trying to somehow distract himself from all this fuss. But he also remembered that no one would forbid him from occasionally spending his birthday in peace. That's why he headed towards the mountain of gifts that were given to him. The letter was the only thing he had. On the day the boy ran away from the estate, this was the only thing he left behind. There was a genuine smile on his face as he thought that he would finally be free. It all started from that day, but at that moment, he didn't know anything yet. He sat alone, lost in his thoughts. The train made its final stop, completing its journey. There were people walking through the window, but the boy was only confused by the fact that the train should have been faster. The place he arrived at was Ives Station in the southern part of the Russian duchy. He walked along the station, not paying attention to what was happening around him. He knew that this territory was under the control of the Hill family, but the mages were no match for him, so it didn't matter that much. The boy kept hearing people talking around him about how those idiots would see him as a test subject. They will try to take possession of him for testing because he was a rare case, born with divine and magical powers. He always considered them to be crazy creatures. Walking along the riverbank, he continued to think about this. Suddenly, he noticed something interesting in the distance. It was a beautiful mansion with a huge field. Coming closer to him, the boy saw a high fence that was preventing him from passing. He was attracted by the sight and the light scent of roses, and that is why he thought that if he looked at the territory from the inside, there would be nothing. To get inside, he had to climb over the fence. Having landed successfully, he could not stop thinking about the magician who built such a beautiful villa, or whether it was all a pretense in order to plot. Inside, everything was just as beautiful as he imagined. In the distance, he noticed a man. He knew he had to run, but he still couldn't do it. The little girl who was not paying attention to him and was reading a book captivated him, making him stand still. She was very beautiful for her age, and he had never seen such beautiful people. The boy couldn't even take his eyes off her. Finally, the girl tore her gaze away from the book and turned all her attention to the uninvited guest. He couldn't believe that in front of him was the very daughter that the head of the Hill family was hiding. He came closer to examine the mysterious girl. Reuvelin thought that she had been reading all this time, but only now noticed that she had been sleeping. It's even surprising that in front of him was the very daughter of the tower's lord who was carefully hidden. His gaze moved to the book in her hands. He wondered if she was already studying dark magic. Coming even closer, he carefully took the book for himself. Finally, seeing what Rosie was actually reading, the boy was very surprised. Instead of dark magic, the book contained recipes for various desserts. Now all this caution of the Tower Lord seemed simply ridiculous. While he was rejoicing too loudly, the girl began to wake up from her sleep. Opening her sleepy eyes, she began to look around to understand what was happening. The boy was horrified that right now he was being caught for being on someone else's territory. Rosie looked at Reuvelin but still remained silent, trying to wake up completely. Both children did not know what to do in such a situation, and therefore silently looked at each other as if they were dumbfounded. The first to emerge from this stupor was the girl who jumped off the bench. Rosie stood in front of him, finally awake from her daytime nap. The boy didn't know how to react to her charge, so he just stood there shocked. And this was the noble lady everyone was talking about, but now it seemed simply impossible. Breaking the silence, the girl asked Reuvelin if he was one of the daughters of the maids who had arrived recently. Her question made him even more stupefied. She looked at the boy with a smile, saying that he was very cute. A blush covered his cheeks, making him feel embarrassed by such a confession. Something incomprehensible was coming out of her mouth, and she was not even able to answer it. So the boy ran towards the exit of the garden while the girl shouted after him. He rushed into the distance without turning around at her cries. I couldn't get her terribly sweet and innocent look out of my head. Remembering this, the boy's face turned red as a tomato. He continued to run without stopping for a minute. So his train passed before his birthday, and when he returned back to the Duchy of Rashian, forgetting this girl was just as easy. Having finally taken off his wig in front of the officers, he revealed his identity after 4 years and 4 months. The guy received a letter of invitation from the Empress, in any case, again trying to introduce him to her youngest daughter. He had no choice but to attend the ball, so he ordered his servants to prepare his evening attire. The butler bowed before him, asking if he needed anything else. The guy immediately refused this offer, but the only thing he wanted to clarify was that the clothes should be in blue tones. And so the day of the banquet arrived. In the hall, everyone was dancing in pairs, not paying attention to what was happening around them. Reuvelin approached all the lonely girls standing there, greeting them. While he was deep in conversation, he couldn't help but think about the Hill family, as they were supposed to attend today's event. Suddenly, a commotion began at the entrance to the palace, attracting the attention of everyone present, including the Duke himself. At the door were Rosnia Hill and Adrian Hill walking into the ballroom. The eldest son walked at the head, showing in every way that he was serious for his age. Everyone present began to whisper among themselves that the tower's master had finally arrived. But Reuvelin no longer cared about this. The crimson hair he had been thinking about all these years came into his field of vision, still as beautiful as he remembered. Rosnia stood there before him, already grown up but already alive and not in his head. The guy opened his mouth and couldn't describe in words how surprised he was to see her here. She was very different from how he remembered her 4 years ago as a little girl. Now Rosie was walking next to her brother, chatting animatedly about something. Now all eyes at the ball were drawn to her alone. Suddenly the crown prince approached her and invited her to dance. He admitted that he was very surprised that Rosnia Hill herself would come out. Reuvelin watched her from afar, completely darkened by what he saw in front of him. At this time, Rosie was dancing with all her might in the center of the hall with the prince. They were laughing and looked too happy together. Seeing this picture in front of him, he had one question in his head. Why did they decide to show it to the world now, and not decide to hide it forever after it was carefully hidden all these years? And now this damn crown prince is dancing with her, so why not just strip him of his title for this opportunity? Having come to his senses, his face immediately changed, not understanding why he was even thinking that way. Turning his head to the side, he noticed Rosie's brother, and judging by his face now, he was also not in a particularly good mood. He realized that Adrian Hill was behaving as usual. Looking at his side again, he noticed that the guy was no longer glaring at him. But that didn't change the way he looked at his sister. Even without realizing that they were in the same boat, this picture in front of them made them angry. It was unpleasant for him to realize that he and Adrian were so similar now. Everyone around was whispering, and in Ruvalin's mind, thoughts continued to visit him about how it would be wonderful to gouge out everyone's eyes. Rosie had already finished dancing as she watched the prince say goodbye to her. Her gaze was drawn to the man who was watching her so intently. For the first time in a long time, Ruvalin and Rosnia's eyes met. They looked at each other silently, not knowing what to say in such a situation. He looked at her as if he was showing his displeasure with their closeness, but he couldn't say anything. A minute later, the girl was already walking past him, thinking about how handsome he was. His fists immediately began to tremble with anger, realizing that he had missed another chance to talk to her. Now Rosie was standing next to Adrian again, telling him what had just happened to her. The girls whispered that the Hills had reached the age for marriage. Now hearing all these services that concerned Rosie too, the guy began to get angry. Turning his gaze from them to the men, he noticed the same picture. Ruvalin's assistant approached him, reporting that everyone was busy talking about the tower's lord, although they were an ordinary family without title or power. The assistant noticed that Ruvalin seemed upset because of the headman's youngest daughter, so he pointed out that everyone was mistaken about her cuteness. The Duke immediately ordered him to shut his mouth towards Rosie. Leaving him to realize what was happening, the guy already hurried away from him. He purposefully headed towards the exit, not paying attention to anyone around him. Now he was burning with anger about this evening, and it wasn't very good. After some time, Ruvalin arrived in the Duchy of Rashian. There were numerous pieces of precious jewelry lying on the table. The assistant thought that the Duke had definitely gone crazy to decide to collect such things. He looked like he usually did, but that wasn't the only strange thing, because right now, for some reason, he was picking up a recipe book. But apparently he is just bored with his life. The guy peeked from behind his book, watching the strange behavior of his assistant. Then a little later, in May, Ruvelian gave everyone instructions regarding the remodeling of the garden. Everyone listened to him attentively, but no one could say a word against his decision. After all, in the summer, the Russian flower was lilac, and then suddenly, like an unexpected guest, a rose of a mysterious color appeared. The boy watched the garden from his chambers, immediately remembering Rosnia Hill. It was the flowers that did not understand about her, forcing her to stare at their beauty without taking her eyes off it. The more he thought about it, the more he wanted to see her. He asked his assistant how he could meet Rosie, but that was clearly not what he expected to hear from the Duke. Damn, Adrian Hill kept ignoring the emails the guy sent. The still shocked assistant asked again if he had misheard when he said Adrian, but the guy admitted that there was no other way to contact Rosie directly, and it was simply outrageous. He was already beginning to think that the Archmage was holding his sister captive. Hearing all this, he hastened to stop him from making such hasty conclusions. The Duke asked if there was any way or not because he was smart, so he clearly knew what to do in such a situation. He admitted that back then in the banquet hall he was confused and didn't know what to do. But now, if he knew that this would happen, he would try to talk to her, and even better if he simply kidnapped her. While he was walking around the room, the assistant only now noticed that Ruvalin had completely gone crazy. A little later, under the influence of an unusual obsession, he finally found a way to meet Rosnia. All the similar ones noticed a huge dog at the station that looked like a wolf. She looked like someone's pet and was very similar to the magician's dog. She was white with green eyes, looking like a retriever. And only then did the problem of the entire meeting become clear. Ruvalin was not in human form. Having already landed on the territory of the Hill family villa, the guy began to put his plan into action. Why did he come here earlier if his assumptions turned out to be correct? He tried to get rid of these feelings for so long, but in the end he still came here. Looking around, he continued to search for Rosie. She was not on the bench where he first met her. There were no flowers or bushes around either. Having examined all the possible territory, he began to feel sad at the thought that he would never meet her again. Suddenly, a girl stood up in the distance. The guy heard a familiar voice and immediately became happy. Rosie stood in front of the dog and couldn't believe that there were animals in this place. It was very interesting because she had never seen animals on private property before. Ruvalin still couldn't believe that he was finally able to meet Rosie. At the same time, Rosie had already hurried to get closer to this incredible creature in front of her. Just one movement of her hand in the air, and Ruvalin was already happier than ever before. He immediately lay down on the sidewalk with his belly up and wagged his tail as if he had seen his owner. and only now did it dawn on him what he was doing. The girl did not expect such a reaction from the dog, not understanding what he was demanding of her. But then she quickly laughed, finding this whole ridiculous situation extremely cute. She couldn't resist him, and so she sat down and stroked his tummy. It was very warm and soft to the touch. Reuvelin really liked the touch, and he would give anything to feel her palm every day. For this, he would even agree to remain in the form of a dog forever, only if he could be next to her like now. But if so, then he cannot be a lover or a groom, but that is not important now. He understood that if he turned into a human, he could scare the girl and she would run away, seeing her positive emotions towards him in the form of a dog. He decided that he would gradually get closer to her without upsetting her too much by revealing his real identity. Although one kiss on the cheek wouldn't hurt since he was in the role of a dog, this was too much. Suddenly, someone's voice caught his attention. The man walked towards his sister, wondering what kind of dog was nearby. The girl didn't even notice how he approached them, showing him what a cute dog she had found. She asked if it was he who brought it here to the garden. But it would be too stupid for Adrian to bring such a pathetic animal that can't even talk to the court. Hearing all these insults directed at him, Reuvelin was seriously hurt. He heard that Rosie stood up for him, saying that his brother's spirit beast didn't talk either, but that's why he was spirit and not just a dog. The Duke thought that the magician began to guess that in front of him was not an animal but a person, so he decided that it was time to get out of here. Damn that hill. If he had been caught on the territory of their villa, it would not have ended well. A second later, the dog was already running away from this family of magicians. Adrian was already charging his magic, preparing to strike. Rosie immediately blocked his path, saying that one cannot use magic on a defenseless animal, but it was too late. The blow had already hit the dog directly on target, but immediately dissipated. The guys looked at this in shock, realizing that he was using light magic, but for the man, it meant that the dog did not know his place. Reuvelin continued to run wherever his eyes looked until the strength left his body. The only thing on his mind was Rosie talking to her brother, and he couldn't get her out of his head. He didn't notice how he already found himself in the forest. Slowing his pace, he began to walk into the valley of the trees. Walking on the ground, he was finally able to transform from a dog into his human form. A beautiful view opened up before his eyes. Looking at the sky, Reuvelin saw something interesting. Even so, there was a silhouette of a girl in the sky, and the way her brother called her Rosie simply delighted him, trying this nickname to taste. Time flew by, and another 4 years passed. Perhaps due to Adrian's close attention, Rosie disappeared without a trace. Looking out the window at those same roses, he realized that he had not seen her during this time. He was constantly going crazy, realizing this fact. If he never saw her again, then there was no point in the man continuing to live. Sitting at his desk, he continued writing. Every line he wrote was about how he couldn't live without Rosie anymore. He sent countless letters of formal proposal, but in all the answers that came back, it was said that if he wanted to show up at the wedding dead, then he should continue asking Rosie to marry him. This was the last time, and most likely he understood that the girl did not even know about his existence, remembering her soft hair and the soft palms that touched him for the first time. The man couldn't even remember a time when he had missed someone so much and for so long. After some time, the guard conveyed news to the Duke that Rosnia planned to stay in the villa. While she will be like Adrian Hill, she will go to the South Seas to get rid of the magical beasts. Everyone understood that if this continued, Mr. Rashian would definitely go crazy, so upon hearing this news, he understood that this was a chance. He immediately became cheerful, realizing that finally, after so many attempts, he would be able to see Rosnia. Over these 4 years, she had probably matured, and he was already imagining in his head how much more beautiful his beautiful Rose had become. It was raining outside that day, and he was lying unconscious on the sidewalk in front of their villa. He was promised that he would be able to control his instability after 25 years, but why did it happen at such an inopportune moment? Opening his eyes, he kept thinking that he would die if he didn't see her at least once. Suddenly, the silhouette of someone's legs fell into his eyes. It was Rosnia with her faithful dog studying Reuvelin in front of her. She looked down on him, not understanding what kind of man was lying in front of her on private property. But he didn't care, because his destiny had come after all. In the morning after the rain, dew dripped from the plants. Rosie slept peacefully alone in the huge chambers as if nothing had happened. Opening her eyes, she began to come to her senses after sleep. Sitting on the bed, she rubbed her eyes and could not understand what kind of sweet smell was in the air. Suddenly, Ruvaline stood up in front of her, asking the girl if she was awake. She still hadn't fully recovered from her sleep, asking the man what was going on. The guy silently listened to her questions about when he woke up and what time it was. He came closer, saying that it was still morning, but the girl asked him to stop where he was. She was wearing just a shirt, and this surprised him very much. Then the guy suggested that they spend the whole day doing nothing, and then they would get used to each other naked. Ek was ashamed, and she didn't want to do it, but he didn't understand why. He was not embarrassed to hint that this made the situation even more attractive. The girl was embarrassed, not understanding what he was even saying. And having asked for forgiveness in advance, Ruvaline lifted the girl into his arms. She wanted to ask him to wait, but the guy had already started kissing her face. He was heading towards the window, and the girl did not understand why he was doing this. Her gaze fell on the view from the window. The entire garden and greenhouse were strewn with beautiful roses. The girl was glad that the flowers had finally bloomed. She admitted that this scent of roses always lifted her spirits whenever she smelled it. The Duke couldn't believe his ears, asking again if she was lying to him now. He couldn't help but notice how sincere she was when she confessed such little things to him. She noticed his gaze and asked why he was looking at her like that. But the answer was obvious. But still, hearing the words how beautiful she was from a person with such an appearance was unrealistic. He laughed a genuine laugh at her words. The guy pressed her to himself, enveloping her in a kiss, early in the morning, and he was already attacking her like a beast. It was just a kiss, but her heart began to beat with such trepidation as never before. He prayed that his dear Rose would remain equally ignorant and think of him as the noble Duke of Rashian. After all, he was frightened by the thought that if she found out the truth about who he really was, she would simply run away. The weather was wonderful in the garden. They were walking along the garden, chatting animatedly about something. She always walked with a glass of liquid, and he couldn't ask her if she liked lemon water because she always drank it. Their conversation turned to hobbies, but Rosie didn't think that Duke Rashian's cooking was one of their hobbies. Bringing her out of her thoughts, Ruvaline asked if she planned to plant any more flowers in the garden. She admitted that the garden was designed according to her mother's taste, and what a surprise it was that the guy knew her. Ruvaline said that he knew her as one of the most famous knights in the Empire. But that was a long time ago, until she gained notoriety by getting married and becoming a magical swordswoman. As far as Rosie could remember, her mother was not a person who could do anything bad to her, although sometimes she could make fun of Adrian by dressing him like a girl. But for them, she was still a real mother. For some reason she missed her, but she didn't really even know if she was still alive. Recalling fragments from the past, she heard that Ruvaline confessed that his teacher was actually the brother of Lady Irunia. She didn't know that her mother had a brother, because she was never told such a thing, but she knew that her mother was the illegitimate child of some nobleman. She asked what his teacher's name was. It turned out that his name was Enric Robitz. The girl couldn't believe her ears. It was that same younger brother of Margrave Robitz. On the Eidos continent, if the Hill family was the most famous family of mages, then the Robitz family was a prestigious family of swordsmen that raised the best knights. The difference between the two families was that the Robitz were loyal to the emperor, while the Hills were the opposite. The Hills are not loyal to anyone, but the founder of their family was a member of the royal family, so they were nobles by blood. Understanding this, it became clear why her mother did not tell about her origin, because this could have caused serious problems. She didn't know what to answer Ruvaline, so she continued to piss. The guy noticed a change in her behavior and asked if everything was okay, to which he received a positive answer. He recalled that it had been about 15 years since Rosie's mother disappeared. The girl could not agree with this, saying that her dad was still trying to find her, but honestly, no one understood whether he would be able to do it. Suddenly, Rosnia ran somewhere. The guy tried to call out to her, not understanding where she had suddenly run and what had already happened. Rosnia stopped near the very bench where they first met and called him to her. Ruvaline understood what kind of place this was, but he was sorry that she herself did not remember it. Sitting on a bench, she asked whether the Duke's teacher was a magician, if he had learned magic from him. Everyone called him a sage, because his teacher was, after all, both a magician and a knight. Oa thought to herself about the fact that there was a magical boy sitting in front of her, but the Rashians didn't like it when they used such expressions related to magic, but that's what made them strange. Looking into his eyes, she couldn't notice how he looked at her with a smile all the time when they were together. But she quickly changed her mind about his family, because he is none other than Duke Rashien and part of her. It was strange because the guy hated the hills, as did his family, so couldn't his kindness be feigned? Unable to bear these thoughts that were swirling around in her head, she nevertheless decided to ask. The guy turned his attention to her, and the smile fell from his face, expecting something serious. And Ruvelin was right because she directly asked him if he hated her because she was from the Hill family. There was a silence and he just kept looking in her direction. But the guy also couldn't help but laugh at this question. I looked at him in shock, not understanding why his friend made me laugh so much. He finally answered, having calmed down, that if he didn't love her he would have already gone crazy. She asked again if this meant that Ruvelin didn't hate her. Having received a positive answer, the girl breathed a sigh of relief. But she immediately became embarrassed, realizing what she said. What was so relieving about this was that it didn't matter whether he liked her or not, or she just didn't want to part with him. At least that's what she thought about it. She glanced at him and decided not to get ahead of herself, since the main thing now was to be realistic. The guy looked at her again with a smile and silently watched her all this time after her last words. He was too handsome, and that's probably why she thought so, because of his beautiful face. Suddenly, Ruvelin leaned towards her and captured their lips in a tender kiss. The girl was embarrassed by such a sudden display of tenderness on his part, but while she was thinking about it, with every second he went deeper and deeper. The jealousy of the villain, who is in love with the main character, clearly should not be in the original and never was before. It was just madness, so before it was too late, Rosie distanced herself from the Duke. He just laughed and suggested that they go further through the garden. But in fact, the guy blushed and admitted that he was now in a difficult situation after the kiss. The girl didn't understand what he meant. Well, it immediately dawned on her when she let her gaze drop to the lower part of his body. He seemed to be full of energy. After all, he was only 21, but it was also unlikely that it was because of his age. It was all simpler than she thought, and the only problem was that she was too charming. Now there was a really awkward pause, and the guy asked the girl not to move, and he would take care of everything himself. At the same time, there was a terrible storm with thunderstorms at sea. The huge ship was floating downstream, but strong waves slowed it down, forcing the vessel to balance to avoid sinking. Adrian Hill stood in his chambers and thought about life. Looking out the window, I couldn't think about my sister. He was already close to the sea monster's lair, and its mysterious location remains just as unknown. But still, he couldn't bring Rosie to such a dangerous place, although the villa is not particularly safe either. Ruvelin Russian still remained the main danger for the girl, but this psycho continued to pester her, and it was unclear why, of all people, he was the one who stuck to Rosie. This union was not allowed even by God himself, since the Rashians and the Hills could not coexist in a peaceful world as an unspoken law. Now there were only 2 left, or 3 at most, and everything would change. He would hurry back to the villa and would not allow some idiots to lay a finger on his precious little sister. If they needed her so much, then let them be ready to lose their lives, but if not, then they are not even worth her little finger. It was early morning outside, and the singing of birds was calling all the people in their houses to wake up from their sleep. Rosie lay in her chambers, deep in sleep. Seeing already the 7th dream, she did not foretell anything good, but suddenly she opened her eyes wide and flew up as if she had seen a nightmare. The girl yawned and realized that waking up at dawn was clearly not part of her plans. It was very surprising to wake up before him remembering what happened last night. Every touch and his words about her endurance, although he held back with all his might, firmly stuck in his head. Remembering all this, she couldn't help but think that he was a seriously terrible person. Having finished with these thoughts, she put on her shoes and moved towards the exit of the room, leaving Ruvelin alone. The view of the garden was painfully familiar, but it was only now that I was able to walk through it alone at such a time. I wonder if she should have taken Ruvelin to the coastal cliff today. But she quickly changed her mind, admitting to herself that it was too much. She didn't even have any idea when Adrian would show up, but it seemed like there were still 2 or 3 days left before his arrival. Feeling trapped, she decided not to burden herself with thoughts early in the morning, but just take a walk, and then prepare breakfast for them with Ruvelin. At the same time, a mysterious man was watching her from the bushes. Rosie stood still, wondering if she imagined it or not. Turning her head to the side, she confirmed her assumptions. The man's hair was as light as the bright sun. He looked at her from the bushes, not believing his eyes. Coming out of his hiding place, he didn't even think that it would be so easy to find the girl alone. He rushed towards her and said that there were rumors that Rosie was the weak spot of the Mad Tower Lord. The girl tensed up, but still asked why the man decided that. But it was quite obvious since the ruler nursed his sister with such trepidation. Of course he would have babysat her, and that didn't mean anything, but since the guy had invaded Hill's land, the girl had every right to use force for self-defense. He laughed with Rosie, realizing that she had answered the question posed to her without realizing it. But the girl was in no mood for laughing, since in just a few minutes the fair-haired guy had already become seriously annoying. Charged magic accumulated in clots in her palm, preparing to attack. But he suddenly grabbed her wrist, thereby breaking her concentration and stopping her subsequent actions. The girl tried to escape from his grip, not knowing what had just happened. She was scared, not understanding how he was able to dispel her magic, because this had never happened before. Only the word princess made her look again at that dangerous smile that never left his face. Coming closer, the mysterious stranger admitted that magic had no effect on him. He was not interested in magic. The girl stopped kicking and asking again what he had just said. The grip on his hand did not weaken as he spoke about a special organism that was not susceptible to magic. The girl thought this term was familiar, but she didn't understand where she heard it from. 3 years ago, when Adrian became the new owner of the tower, something strange happened. They received news that magicians were conducting experiments on people, so they immediately began an investigation. All subjects were in a cave that they managed to find by chance. Standing inside, they were in shock, not understanding how this happened. People all along the space were placed in cages, having completely lost hope of any salvation. Remembering this, Rosie will never be able to erase this horrific picture from her memory, no matter how hard she tries. But among all the captives, she remembered a little boy who had a certain immunity to magic. But this boy was supposed to die that day. She didn't believe that it was the same child standing in front of her, or that it was just another similar person. Rosie finally broke free from his grip as he began to state how much he hated mages, especially the tower's master. He thought about how much he wanted to grab her and drag her into his yard, watching as the girl would cry, calling for her precious brother. This was already going beyond all bounds, but Rosie remained standing, thereby indicating that such threats would not break her. Leaving her in confusion, the guy hurried away because he just needed to make sure that she was there. A whirlpool of vortex swirled around the stranger, forcing the girl to cover herself with her hands from the force that was carrying her. The girl narrowed her eyes, waiting for what would happen next. But a minute later, the place where he stood was already empty, leaving behind only the dissipating wind. Only now did it dawn on her that the guy was talking about captivity. Even without the strength to move from the spot, these fragments of their dialogue repeated in my head. But if this man didn't take her captive, then it meant that Ruvel and Rashian would do it. After a while, the girl returned back inside the villa. She hadn't even had time to go past the threshold when the Duke immediately ran up to her with questions about where she had been when he woke up. The girl heard all this but did not react in any way. The guy immediately asked if everything was okay, not even suspecting what had happened to her on the street. Quickly forcing a smile, she admitted that she wanted to make breakfast. But he couldn't be fooled. Something definitely happened to her on the street, but why doesn't she want to talk about it? He smiled in response, urging her to rest better and he himself would take care of everything. The girl stopped him, telling him to let her do the cooking today, since he always does it himself. As she walked past him towards the kitchen, she didn't even bother to look at him once. With every retreating movement, she became more and more unattainable. He thought that there was just a little bit left and he would be able to win her heart. So why now, so suddenly, did she start to pull away again? But the guy couldn't let her leave so easily. If he doesn't win her heart, he will die like this, because she is his only one. The thought alone made me sick, realizing that it would be better to die than to imagine Rosie with someone else. But if that happened, he wouldn't be able to spend time with Rosie anymore, and he didn't want that either. If she forgets him when he dies and is with someone else, her heart began to fill with anger from such thoughts. Seeing her in front of him at the counter cutting vegetables, he was clearly confident in his intentions. Every step towards her cut through this unattainable distance, like a hot knife through paper. Now was not the time to think like that, because he finally had his chance and he would not let it go for anything. Rosie turned around in surprise, feeling a peeling sensation behind her back. He wanted to help Rosie with the cooking because it was much faster with 4 hands, and that was an indisputable fact. The girl gave up her seat, saying that she wanted to make a stew, since it came down to it. Not wanting to be near again, the girl went in search of ingredients for the dish. He could not notice this, but decided not to be indignant, but to do as she herself wished. Approaching the cutting board, he began to chop the ingredients, and in his thoughts the question still visited him: what if his mana gets out of control again, and he is on the verge of life? Will she allow him to die, or will she again save him from certain death? It was already night outside, and clouds covered the sky, preventing the moon from illuminating the earth. Reuvelin tossed and turned alone in his chambers, unable to sleep due to his poor health. Suddenly the door to the room opened. Rosie walked barefoot straight to the Duke's bed. The guy couldn't even put a couple of words together, trying to catch his breath and watching the approaching girl. She came closer to check whether the man was sleeping or not. The thought that this would happen never left her for a minute, so she decided to verify her assumptions. He could only squeeze out her name so quietly that it seemed as if it was not said out loud. Tears flowed from his eyes, and he did not understand whether he was alive or whether he had gone to heaven. With the last of her strength, she raised herself up on her elbows, sitting up on the bed. He never stopped calling her for a second, each time doing it more and more confidently. She felt sympathy, not realizing that the situation was so bad. The hand automatically reached out towards him. Wiping the tears from his cheek, she asked why he was crying. The guy silently looked at her, noticing such gratitude on her part for the first time. And the girl continued to look at him with a smile on her face, unable to tear her gaze away. Then the guy pulled her closer and decided to ask why she was avoiding him. She promised to help him, so why is she treating him so cruelly? The guy held her by the wrists, depriving her of the slightest chance of escape. But his face was weak and she could not resist his charms. Reuvelin hugged her, begging for help. The touch on my cheek was so gentle that it was even surprising. Unnoticed, he moved closer and closer to her face until the girl was unable to look away, as if under hypnosis. They locked their lips in a kiss again. But for her, it was different now. Now she understood that the feelings she had for him filled her heart. But even if this person was out of his mind and would pretend, it didn't matter, since she would still have to deal with it later. A little later, deathly silence overtook the chambers. Reuvelin, as usual, watched Rosie sleep. She looked so sweet and so beautiful while she was deep in sleep. But suddenly, this idyll was interrupted by something, and the guy immediately noticed it. It was Rosie who suddenly woke up and moved from a sitting position. She had never felt so confused in her life as to why exactly he had started stalking her. The girl couldn't hide her overwhelming emotions. She just continued to cry silently while the guy calmed her down. If it was because he asked her to be patient until she disappeared on her own. She lifted her head by the chin and directed her tear-stained face at him. She kept thinking about what she really felt for him. In front of her now was the first person who made her feel this way. He was even the first one to kiss her, and it felt special. That's why she always wanted more. Remembering this, it was precisely for this reason that she should have contacted the Duke, but she did not do so because then the distance that appeared before them would have been simply unbearable. What should she do if she is the only one whose heart trembles, and also the only one who suffers because of it? He really blamed himself and kept saying that he was wrong. So he pulled her back to him again. Enveloping her completely in his bear hug, he asked only one thing: that she stop crying. The guy pressed himself against her neck with his eyes closed and could not open them, thinking that if he did this, she would simply disappear. The girl at the same time looked rooted to the spot, not knowing how to react. In any case, now she could only afford 2 things: to allow herself to be caught and used as a weapon or to be stabbed from behind. That's why she immediately pushed him away from herself while the man was recovering from such harshness on his part. It was obvious that she was not going to sit back and wait while he pursued his goals, so she would lead him into her trap herself. She asked him if he was doing all this on purpose. The girl couldn't stand it and started screaming about why he fell in the garden of their villa. Did her brother do something bad for Rosie to pay for it? She thought she was being kind, but it turned out she was simply being used. Anger boiled in her veins, and such thoughts only made it worse, because how could she fall in love with someone after the first meeting? He silently looked at her, giving her the opportunity to throw out all the negative emotions that had accumulated inside her over all these days. Only then, having made sure that she had finished, did he breathe a sigh of relief, expecting that the situation would turn out worse than he thought. This reaction, after all, was more serious than he thought, although the fact remains that she could not help but fall in love with the Duke. He couldn't find the right words, not knowing how best to answer her question. But unfortunately, the longer he thought, the more strongly he showed his reaction, and this always speaks louder than words. So it means that he was still of sound mind, and everything he said then was a lie. It was all a lie, and the girl immediately started crying again, not understanding what she had done that they were treating her so meanly. The guy immediately jumped up to her, wiping away the tears that had just appeared on her cheeks. He wouldn't even dare to think about using her and would never do such a thing. But it was all too strange. Would Duke Rashian behave like that as if he was in love? And that was why she thought that it was part of the plan. And that explained everything, because there was never any reason for anyone from his family to hurt her family without some good reason. He immediately said that this was not the plan. But at this time, Rosie was already getting out of bed, saying that she only asked for him to be honest with her. Her hand remained hanging in the air, extended in a silent touch. Since everything turned out this way, now he will be obliged to answer the above questions. All without hiding, because now she had cast a spell that revealed any slightest lie. She could have used this magic before, but she didn't want to ruin her rose-colored glasses back then. Only then did the guy say that he would tell everything from the beginning to the end. But just before that, he asked her to promise him one thing. The girl was surprised by this, not understanding what kind of promise they could be talking about. But everything was simple, because he asked that even after he told the truth, she would not hate him. Just one promise and the whole truth will be in the palm of her hand. But did he have a secret so terrible that she would hate him? If so, then she will decide this after she hears what the guy tells her. Everything should not have turned out this way, and this could not help but upset Reuvelin. Having sorted out his strength, he finally began his story. He first saw Rosnia when he was just 13 years old. At that time, he crept into the garden and watched the girl sleep and ran away as soon as she woke up. The magic of lies did not react, so everything he told her was true. But when he was 13, she was only 11 or 12 years old. It was the first time the guy felt this way. Even then, he fell in love with her at first sight, thinking that she was the only one in his life. The girl was surprised that it was so long ago, and this meant that he had liked Rosie for more than 8 years. But that was not all, and the guy recalled their meeting at the banquet in the palace. Only there did he realize how passionately he had been looking forward to meeting her. At this point, his story ended, waiting for Rosie's reaction. The girl was shocked by this, but she was in no hurry to break free from his grip. Noticing this, he began to pull her closer. But even the fact that they only saw each other twice and didn't even talk didn't change anything. He was still crazy about her and was not afraid to seem crazy, but she herself understood this perfectly well. Ever since he realized his feelings, he had been sincerely yearning for the girl all the time. He didn't have the opportunity to meet her, and so he came to the villa, thinking that this was his last chance. The girl was completely shocked, not believing that he had been trying to get her for so long. Remembering the time she walked through the rain to see a man lying unconscious. Although she could have gone further, she did not. Continuing to feel her gaze on his figure, he was sincerely happy. After all, he believed and hoped until the very end that his destiny would come for him. In that case, she now understood that if she had not found Reuvelin then, he could have simply died. So was he in his right mind? Even the man didn't know the answer to this question. Now, after such a confession, he asked what magic told her. Did she say that these words were the undeniable truth, or did she still not believe him? He couldn't forget her for more than 8 years and risked his life just to meet her. The girl listened to him attentively, still silent, waiting for him to finish. So how can she recognize the real Reuvelin now, and maybe she even thought he was crazy? Acting like he was possessed towards the girl, slowly wrapping invisible arms around her neck. Finally finishing, he said that this was the whole truth that interested her. The girl first wanted to clarify one detail about the fact that the guy had feelings for her for so long. She only thought of Ruvelian Rashian as the main character, so why did it happen that without her knowledge, he fell in love with her and not the main character? The girl admitted that she also fell in love with the Duke, but there was one small nuance. Even before he had finished listening, the guy began to glow with happiness, realizing that he had achieved what he wanted. But still, the more she learned about this Duke, the more he reminded her of a crazy stalker. But the main thing was that she was convinced that he was not using her, but simply wanted to meet, and that was already pleasing. The guy swore to her that it was true, and that he loved only her. At this point, Rosie stopped him abruptly, holding her palm out in front of her. Until the guy attacked her as usual, she confessed that she met a blonde guy in the garden today who was immune to magic. While he listened to her attentively, she said that she was threatened with captivity and was told that the girl was a weak spot for Adrian. The guy immediately recognized his subordinate Alex, but it was strange that he was on hill territory because no one had called him here. So he really was one of Ruvelin's people, but he hastened to calm him down, saying that all his words were untrue and she did not perceive them incorrectly. The guy asked if the magic of lies still worked, to which the girl hastened to reassure him, saying that she herself had already become convinced of his rightness and therefore turned it off. In any case, it meant that little Alex misunderstood his order and did everything correctly, at least for him. This had nothing to do with his goal, since it had remained unchanged from the very beginning. Ruvelin only wanted to find her, but also to win the heart of the beautiful Rosie. The girl even blushed like a tomato, completely embarrassed by the fact that this was the first guy in front of her who behaved properly. He rushed closer to her, rising from the bed and shortening the treasured distance. He reached out and ran his fingers through her hair. Now that she knew the truth, he asked if she would like to run away from him. But now that the misunderstanding had been cleared up, they had one more thing to talk about. Hearing that the conversation would be about his brother, he hurried to get ahead of her. He brushed a stray strand of hair from his face behind his ear and caught his attention. He kissed her on the corner of her lips and said that before he continued, he wanted to ask something. Such a sudden kiss threw him off balance, wondering what he needed anyway. The question was why she cried before. He gave her an ultimatum: either she tells or kisses him again, so the girl immediately chose the former. The reason for the tears was that Rosie thought the guy was using her, so it hurt her feelings a lot. He didn't believe that such a stupid reason could hurt the girl. Well, how could it be otherwise if he treated her so well and everything was confusing, forcing her to think about hidden intentions? Rosnia was so sweet and sincere now. But the guy really couldn't help but be kind to her because she was the one and only for him. Looking at her, the guy rushed to kiss her tear-stained eyes so that she would not be sad anymore. She asked him if he really loved her. A smile blossomed on his lips, declaring that it was true, but his feelings went beyond these boundaries. But if it was easier for her to call what was between them love, then so be it. What kind of fairy tale nonsense is this, and if he pretends as she wants, can it then be called love? Seeing her reaction, the man asked if Rosie really hated him for this. Feeling him pulling her towards him, she admitted that it wasn't quite like that, which she immediately clarified. The guy was very afraid that the girl would hate him, but now that he has a choice, he will never be able to change his mind about this. Now that the whole truth had come out, he admitted that he would no longer be able to let her go. But he also needed to know that he didn't care when his brother returned home, because he couldn't change anything. Just as she wanted to object, he suddenly drowned out her words with a kiss. She closed her eyes completely, surrendering herself to him from head to toe, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. And so another night of theirs passed together. In the morning, Rosie slept as if nothing had happened and there was no sign of trouble. Suddenly, Adrian's dog woke Rosie up, doing everything possible to make her wake up. Only after waking up from sleep did she ask the dog why he was whining so early in the morning. The pet pointed its muzzle to the side, and it seemed that Rosie gradually began to understand. Sleep was brushed away as if by hand, and she quickly headed in the direction the dog was pointing. Opening the curtains, not even paying attention to the blinding sun, she was horrified. Hadrian's ship arrived at the port earlier than they expected, and this was very bad. Having lowered the anchor into the water, the ship arrived at its destination. Adrian Hill stood at the head of the crew, analyzing what was happening on the riverbank. She ran to Ruvelin's chambers to tell him the unpleasant news she had just learned. The girl tugged at his shoulder, thereby forcing him to wake up from his sleep as quickly as possible. Realizing that his sleep was disturbing Rosie, he immediately woke up asking what was happening. The girl herself was out of breath, and this gave the situation an even greater twist, making the Duke think that something terrible had happened. She confessed to Ruvelin that her brother had returned early. After some time, having finally come to their senses, they stood in the living room and decided to stick to the scenario they had thought out the previous night. The guy was already collected and fully prepared for the approaching storm in the form of Hill. She reminded that when the two men meet, Ruvelin will have to say that the girl accidentally found him and saved him from the surging madness, and they at most held hands for therapeutic purposes. But then he said that there was another option and she could just leave here with him and live a new life together. It was simply impossible, and the girl herself understood everything perfectly well. Could she have escaped from her brother's suffocating overprotection? But wasn't the machine the same? But was it then right to leave one for another and suffer as before? Hearing the barking of a dog from the street, she quickly came to her senses, realizing that Adrian was already very close. She led Ruvelin to the closet, asking him to hide from his brother in the closet. He was like a stone and did not move, which made the situation worse and was already begging the guy to hurry up. The guy didn't protest, but such a commotion was really driving him crazy, so he decided to call out to Rosie, urging her to stop. Putting her hand on his cheek, the girl noticed how he melted and pressed himself against her palm. So she decided to admit that, frankly speaking, he was disgusting as hell. It was like a carrot and stick, so Rosnia softened her insulting words with a gentle kiss. Not understanding such a sudden change, Ruvelin looked at the girl like a statue. As much as he wanted to continue kissing her, everything in this world is not eternal, so he reluctantly pulled away from her lips. Having his full attention, and realizing that he was now willing to listen to her, she said that she would try to create a loophole so that Ruvelin could escape. But all he could do was hide in this closet until he gave the signal. He made a puppy face and asked again if he really needed to run away alone. Whether she would go with him would have to be thought about later, because now she had no time for it. It hurt her to say goodbye to him so easily, but she tried to contain her feelings under the false mask of a smile. He too was not happy about their separation, but unlike the girl, he could not hide his sadness. Adrian Hill arrived on their family's property, and the loyal dog immediately ran to greet his owner. The girl stood at a distance with a silent but such a warm smile on her face that only her brother could see. He walked closer to her, listening to his sister's greeting on his return. Seeing his sister safe and sound, the guy finally changed his expression, smiling back at her. Adrian looked at Rosie, greeting the girl in return. They continued to stand on top of each other, rejoicing at their reunion. But the girl was already running in panic in her soul, thinking how she would be able to survive this if her brother found out the truth. I wonder if he'll suspect something unusual if she starts acting cute, which wasn't her style. But she had nothing to lose, so she spread her arms, inviting her brother into her arms. Adrian didn't have time to react before the girl, without even waiting for consent, pounced on him. The girl laughed at his outrageous face, but still did not let go, pressing as close as possible. Rosie confessed how bored she was alone. Even the same meals were boring to spend alone, and there was no one to talk to, so all she could do was wait for his return. The man looked at her with a calm expression on his face, pretending not to see his sister's strange behavior. She offered to have breakfast with him if he was hungry, and she would cook him whatever he asked for. Watching and seeing Rosie's reaction, she immediately thought that she had gone too far, although at the same time she understood that she should have said at least something. While she was thinking about this and digging herself deeper into the hole, Adrian extended his hand to her. Having given her a slap on the back of the head, the girl immediately became indignant and squealed in pain. He was curious about the reason for such friendliness on her part. Maybe she had eaten something wrong or her head was spinning because of the heat. The girl screamed at him, holding the place of impact that continued to pulsate. But the brother didn't care because he already thought that she had some kind of problems or something like that while he was traveling at sea in search of the monster. But he was even more confused by her closed outfit. But if he knew the reason why she was dressed like that, Rosie would already be dead. But she still said that it was beautiful, and that's why she wanted to dress up. Now, Adrian had no doubts left that something had really happened, but he still decided to remain silent and not attack his sister with questions about her lies. Having gone inside the house, the girl said that since he was tired from the road, she was obliged to cook him something tasty. Still, sometimes she needs to act like a pretty sister too, but Adrian just sat on the chair as usual, all serious, and told her to do as she wanted. That sincere smile never left her face for a minute, and wishing him all the best, she went to the kitchen, but still in her mind she was thinking about putting a sedative in his food. He continued to pretend that everything was normal, and just watched her. But apparently Rosie forgot that her brother was the master of the tower and that he too could do something about it. At the same time, the girl was already in the kitchen and cutting carrots for the dish that she planned to cook for her and her brother. Everything was going quite well and it was very good, starting to think that it would all end soon. Here, suddenly and unexpectedly, not expecting a trick, the girl dropped the knife from her hands and heard some very loud blow in the house through this peaceful silence. The girl turned her head in the direction of this noise, not understanding where it was coming from. At that very second, it suddenly dawned on her, and she immediately became afraid for her assumptions, even if it was not what she thought. Rosie tried to convince herself that everything was fine, but she still ran towards the noise, worried that Adrian had found Ruvelin. There was complete chaos on the street, and all the furniture was scattered chaotically throughout the garden, shattered into pieces by someone's force. The girl noticed her brother and immediately rushed to him, asking what happened here. The way she walked towards him with confidence made him freeze in place, not believing his eyes. Ruvelin knelt before her brother, unarmed, while he was seething with anger and preparing to attack. Rosie had never seen Adrian so angry and just silently continued to listen to the questions flying in her direction about what that bastard Rashian had forgotten on their mansion territory. Shaking off the dust from the fall as if nothing had happened, Ruvelin clarified that he really was an idiot, as the magician had said. But that didn't change the fact that he wasn't just awful, he was first and foremost a moron. While the girl watched them in shock, she thought that in front of her were not people, but some two angry dogs, and she was the only normal one here. Adrian didn't understand what kind of nonsense the Duke was talking about his sister. But the guy didn't lose his head and decided to clarify that everyone called him Rosie the dog, to which he received a threat that he should not pronounce his sister's name in such a dirty tone. But it was too late because even Ruvelin himself did not remember how many times he had already done this. The guy continued to smile, pretending that he was not committing a fatal act, and continued to speak tenderly about Rosie. The girl briefly heard him say that she was constantly calling him by name affectionately and could not remember when she had ever done that. But still, why did he say this in front of Adrian, knowing his nature and seeing how his words made him angry? The guy didn't wait and grabbed his cane with such force that his knuckles turned white with anger, and it felt like the instrument would simply break in half. The charged energy accumulated in the palm, transmitting it through the cane. The girl had never seen such magic, but what she wanted, knowing that her brother had probably already thought of something too much. There was no time to think, so she immediately rushed towards Adrian, trying to stop him. The magician just grinned with anger and cast a fierce glance at her, thinking that his sister would get scared and retreat as usual. But she was determined even when she listened to his threats about her behavior in Adrian's absence. Even while she was trying to act brave, she still backed away closer to Ruvelin, covering him with herself in case of an emergency. Rosie didn't understand why her body moved on its own, although in her mind she knew that her brother would kill her for such tricks and disobedience. She decided to explain herself to him and told him that she had helped the unconscious Duke Rashian and nothing more, so he shouldn't be angry over such trifles. But this information was extremely limited, so he decided that he would quickly torture this damned bastard and get everything he needed out of him if she did not want to explain this whole circus in a good way. All the magic that had managed to accumulate in the cane delivered a crowning blow towards the Duke. The girl began to beg her brother to stop, but it was too late. Ruvelin was already grabbed by chains, completely covering his entire body, forcing him to simply hang helplessly in the air, and the girl asked her brother to calm down, because in front of him was not just a person, but Duke Rashian himself, but it seemed that this did not bother him at all, doing whatever he wanted. He told the girl not to worry, but how could she sit idly by if it was her brother and he always acted so nastily towards others? She was almost 21, and Adrian continued to treat her like a child, overprotecting her, but the most important thing about this was that he couldn't even listen properly. Rosnia gritted her teeth in pain, realizing that now was the only chance to clear up all the misunderstandings that were happening in the Hill family. This is her second life, and now she will definitely tell him everything she thinks, and most importantly that she no longer wants to tolerate his overprotection, as it is time for him to come to terms with the fact that Rosie is an adult. Listening to all these screams, Adrian still told her that apparently she still doesn't remember anything. She was stunned when her brother reminded her that over the last 20 years, the girl had almost died 37 times, and she really didn't remember it. but the number was terribly large. When she was only 3, she almost fell off a cliff. At 4, a boat on the lake capsized and Rosie almost drowned. And recently she was attacked by a magical monster, and how then should her brother not be overly caring, realizing that danger was always stalking the girl? And here they are again, in a situation that should never have happened. No matter how hard Adrian tries to fill in the gaps, there are always problems, and now it is presented in the form of Ruveline. Coming closer, the guy continued to look towards his enemy, completely not understanding why even now Ruveline was acting as if nothing had happened. Realizing that the magician would not receive an answer to his questions, he increased the magic, hanging him higher in the air and making them squeeze him to such an extent that the guy experienced colossal pain. But suddenly the flails cracked, dropping the Duke back to the ground. Somewhere in the distance, the voice of a fair-haired man was heard calling his master and attracting all attention. As if not noticing all this mess that happened a couple of minutes ago, Alex headed in their direction, asking Ruveline what he was doing here. Rosie realized that it was the same suspicious blonde man, as she thought, after all, he was hiding somewhere near the villa instead of leaving. He walked past Adrian and Rosie, heading straight towards his lordship, still not understanding why he was sitting so calmly tied up. Only then did Ruveline turn to his ward and send him a serious look, thereby saying that this was only the beginning. The atmosphere in the Hill family estate grew even more tense with each passing minute, with the arrival of one of the Roshian dukedom's wards. The guy stood near the angry people and waited for an answer to the question he asked his duke. Ruveline himself cast such an angry glance in Alex's direction that no one had expected it, but instead of explaining his actions to his guard, he decided that it would be better to ask about the conversation between him and Rosnia in the garden. The guy rubbed the back of his head, not understanding why he was so serious about the Tower Lord's younger sister, but was it really that important right now when their enemy was nearby? While the girl listened to their conversation, she could not believe that he was really Ruveline's subordinate, but they were so close that they even communicated like brothers. Suddenly, Adrian drew attention to himself again by directing his magic into battle, only this time it was directed towards Alex. The girl didn't have time to come to her senses before she realized that it was again a binding spell that her brother had already used on Ruveline today. The guard folded his arms and was in no hurry to do anything, and only Rosie understood that magic would not work on him. And it was true because at that very moment, the spell that was directed towards the man immediately dissipated into the air. At that time, Adrian silently stared at his opponent, trying to comprehend what had just happened, because in his experience, no one had ever been able to resist his power. The sister immediately ran to her brother, explaining that it was useless and that magic would not work on him, to which he was immediately surprised. Among all the test subjects they had saved 3 years ago, there had been one special guy, and she hoped that Adrian would be able to remember that incident. The guy remembered this, but did not understand how this could happen since all the prisoners died that day. Alex immediately intervened, silently watching them and claiming that the boy was alive and well, and claiming that he was dead was very bold, because he stood before them immune to magic. And he was very interested in what the great master was planning to do now in this situation. Rosie couldn't notice the fact that the kid knew how to irritate people, and while Adrian stood there and did nothing, she understood that he probably wanted to die since he was saying such things. But one should not underestimate the strongest of magicians, because he was always prepared for any outcome that could happen during his life. With just one movement of the hand, the opening cane flashed with a dangerous light. Since magic is invalid in this case, he will simply use more brute force with the help of his saber, which was already on full display in front of them, hidden all the time in his cane just in case. The guard was stunned, clearly not expecting such an outcome from Hill. But before he had time to figure it out, the magician was already heading towards him, not even giving his opponent a chance to prepare for an attack. Adrian ran with such confidence as if he was ready to tear him to shreds in a matter of seconds, but Alex himself did not make himself wait long, pulling out a saber from his bosom, preparing for battle. The magician didn't even suspect that he was facing one of the most powerful weaponsmiths in the world, and it was simply impossible to deal with him so easily. But he didn't care about it and continued to do everything he could. But Rosie herself knew that her brother was an excellent swordsman and was even worried about Ruveline's assistant, thinking that he would definitely die in this fight. Suddenly, the Duke approached her, hugging her by the shoulders and asking if she had decided to run away with him from her tyrant brother. She immediately became embarrassed and moved away from him, thinking that her heart would jump out of her chest from such a surprise, but she still refused him. But he did not understand why she was so slow with her answer, knowing that if she stayed, the girl would die because of him. But Rosie herself understood that if she agreed, Adrian would destroy all of Ruvaline's possessions. And then she thought about his words, because everything he said made sense, because if she was on the verge of death for tens of years, Adrian's obsession was too strong since childhood. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by some kind of crash, and it was Alex who flew onto the asphalt from the magician's blow. Adrian walked towards him, holding his saber down, claiming that he had lasted too long for such a brat. His eyes were burning with fire, making it seem like there was some crazy psycho in front of them, but all this was unimportant, since the guard would never defeat Adrian. The blow that landed on Alex was enough to destroy the fence around the flower beds behind him, but he couldn't help but admit his surprise that he hadn't expected such knowledge of fencing from the mage. But the guard shouldn't relax, because Adrian was already standing next to him, resolutely preparing to deliver the final blow, killing his opponent. The girl saw all this and asked Ruvaline if he should stop them before it was too late. Otherwise, if everything continued in the same spirit, someone would get hurt. Seeing her brother's face, Rosie was sure that just a little bit more and the inevitable would happen. But the Duke said that everything was fine, and she had nothing to worry about. Suddenly, someone's quick steps were heard in the middle of the garden. Rosie couldn't help but notice it as she immediately looked in the direction of the noise, and her face immediately showed shock mixed with horror. 2 more guards appeared in front of her, reinforcing Ruvaline, who blocked Adrian's path to Alex with their swords. The tower's master was clearly not ready for this and moved away from them, already thinking up a new strategy for the battle. Rosie, who continued to stand next to the Duke, was still trying to comprehend what was happening and to understand, to begin with, when help had arrived. But even if that were the case, and even though there were now 3 of them, it would still be very difficult for them to defeat Adrian without even getting hurt. The girl understood the whole deplorable situation and knew her brother's actions in advance, understanding one detail for herself. This could escalate into a full-scale war, and rather than wait for the battle to end, it would be better to take Ruvaline to safety. Looking at her lover, she continued to think about it, only now realizing that she simply had to get him out of here. The Duke continued to look at her with his gentle smile, which made the girl think even more and wander in her thoughts, not knowing what to do. But what will happen after Ruvaline leaves? And she knew the answer to her question in advance, realizing that the girl will again be locked in the tower, completely alone, and she did not want such an outcome at all. Now, having thought everything through clearly, she turned to the Duke, thereby drawing all his attention to herself while there was such an opportunity. She asked that everything he said about running away was still in force, that she agreed to run away with him and leave her old life in the past, including her brother. And if Adrian tries to start a war, she will do everything possible to stop him. Only on such conditions for freedom she is ready to agree. The man laughed as if he didn't want to hear her words, thinking to himself in advance that Rosie was doing this because she didn't want to part with him for a minute. The girl even forgot for a moment what she was talking about, completely melting from just one touch of his hand on her cheek and embarrassed like a little girl unable to control her feelings. It was even funny to see, so Ruvaline decided to increase the tension between them by leaning so close that only Rosie herself could hear the question about her feelings. But as always, he chose the wrong place for such tenderness, and their harmony was again interrupted by the sounds of battle, which forced both to turn towards the battle. Everything was worse than they thought, as one of the guards had already been defeated and was sitting meekly on the asphalt. And the other guard with gray hair was trying to catch his breath, but had not fully come to terms with the fact that Adrian Hill had defeated them. But what could be expected from this battle, if even Alex was resistant to the power of the tower's lord? Then those who remained could not resist this, which the man willingly used. Keeping the guards under his control, Rosnia's brother could clearly hear the conversation between the girl and Ruvaline, which means he would never allow what they wanted to do. Rosie pressed herself closer to the Duke out of fear, hoping that he would protect her. Adrian was already heading towards them, preparing to destroy Ruvaline to pieces, trying to protect his sister. He was already all ablaze, tired from the circus they had put on for him since his arrival, but he still threatened to have his sister return to him. The girl blocked his path in her thoughts, asking for forgiveness, because he left him no other choice but to stop his anger. She will take all the blame on herself, just to stop the war between the Hill and Rashian families. Rosie admitted that she was tired of the way Adrian behaved towards her. At the same time, her brother listened to this without even knowing what to say, because only now Rosie was able to knock him out of her thoughts.